Night had settled over the Texas plains, but the darkness outside the train window was drowned beneath a river of electric light. House after house, street after street, the glow cut through the warm June air like a quiet declaration of power. Unoffizier Verrer Burkhardt pressed his forehead to the glass, his breath fogging the pain, and wrote a single line into the diary he kept hidden from his fellow officers. No nation at war should live like this. With Americist, he had grown used to the blacked-out towns of Germany, to the fear of a sky that might ignite at any moment under British bombs. Yet here, an ocean away, from the collapsing Reich, every farmhouse shone like it had something to prove. Even at this late hour, neon signs hummed, warehouse windows glowed, and long rows of telephone poles carved bright pathways into the night. These men had been soldiers of the Afrika Korps, hardened by years of sand, hunger, and retreat. But nothing in the desert had prepared them for this first glimpse of America, a land whose ordinary lights seemed to whisper that their war was already lost. What else waited for them beyond those illuminated streets? And how much of what they had believed would survive the journey ahead? The collapse began long before the prisoners ever saw a single American town. It started in the dust and heat of Tunisia, when the Afrika Korps, the same units that had once pushed the British back to the gates of Egypt, found themselves surrounded, starving, and out of fuel. On May 13, 1943, General Jürgen von Arnim surrendered 250,000 German and Italian soldiers, ending the last Axis resistance in North Africa. For many of these men, it felt less like a military defeat and more like an unraveling of the world they thought they understood. In the makeshift holding camps near Oran, Algeria, the unraveling quickened. Thousands of prisoners were processed each day with a level of precision they had once believed belonged only to Germany. Cameras clicked, medical forms were filled, vaccinations were administered by American officers speaking fluent German officers trained specifically for this moment. These gestures, simple as they were, carried an unsettling message. Their captors were better organized than the Reich at its peak. But the first true fracture in their beliefs came with the food. Men who had grown thin on desert rations, dried biscuits, watery soups, and whatever could be scavenged, found themselves holding trays of white bread, real coffee, and meat served twice a day. Some whispered that the Americans were staging a performance, preparing a deception. Others doubted even that. No one could understand how a nation fighting a global war could afford to treat enemies this well. Then came the Liberty ships. To the POWs, they appeared as nothing more than cargo vessels waiting to take them across the Atlantic. They had no idea these ships were themselves symbols of American power steel hulls constructed in days rather than months, rolling off assembly lines with a speed that defied logic. Only after conversations with American guards did the realization seep in. 3 of these ships were being launched every day. Each carried parts from dozens of factories in dozens of states. A national web of production Germany could no longer match. The crossing delivered its own revelations. POWs watched sailors casually discard more food in a single day than some German units had seen in a week. They learned that the vessel carrying them was one of 2,710 Liberty ships built during the war, each requiring 250,000 components. They walked the deck beneath a rotating radar antenna, a technology they had believed was scarce, even among their own elite units. And in the quiet moments of the voyage, men who had sworn loyalty to the Reich began to sense a grim truth. America was not the weak, divided nation of Nazi propaganda. It was something far more dangerous. A nation whose industrial strength seemed endless. By the time land finally appeared on the horizon, they were no longer expecting to find a struggling republic. But nothing, not the defeat in Africa, not the abundance on the ships, could prepare them for what awaited on the American coast. When the Liberty ship finally eased into Norfolk Naval Base, the prisoners looked upon a scene that felt less like a harbor and more like a revelation. Crane after crane swung effortlessly over miles of docks, lifting steel containers with electric power that moved smooth as breath. 47 cargo ships lay in various stages of loading and unloading, each dwarfing the next. The entire port functioned like a single organism, precise, tireless, and impossibly vast. Many of the men had worked in Germany's industrial centers before the war. None had seen anything like this. Hamburg, the pride of the Reich, could not match a single day of Norfolk's traffic. From the moment they stepped onto American soil, the myth of a weak, disorganized America began to die. Yet the real destruction of Nazi illusions would come not in the ports, but on the rails. The prisoners boarded Pullman cars with padded seats, sleeping berths, silverware, and dining service. Even the guards apologized that the air conditioning might not be working properly. a concept so absurd that some POWs believed it was sarcasm. But it wasn't. It was simply normal. As the trains rolled inland, the transformation deepened. Night after night, the prisoners pressed their faces to the glass, watching towns blaze with light. Tiny communities, Martinsville, Danville, Greensboro, glowed like cities, their storefronts illuminated, their factories running second and third shifts. In Germany, entire regions had been dark since 1940. Here, electricity flowed into every street and every window. A single railway yard consumed more power in 1 hour than many districts of Berlin used in a day. Then came the factories. The Alcoa plant in Tennessee stretched for miles along the river, its furnaces devouring more electricity than Munich itself. In Louisville, 4 synthetic rubber plants built in only 18 months towered over fields that had been empty the year before. German engineers on the train recognized the machinery instantly. Catalytic crackers, distillation columns, polymerization units. But what stunned them was not the technology, it was the scale. Each plant was larger than anything Germany had ever built, and there were dozens more across the country. And looming above all of it was Willow Run. Even from the train tracks, the factory dominated the horizon. 2.5 million square feet of steel and glass, producing a B-24 Liberator every 63 minutes. Prisoners counted the bombers visible through the open doors. Fuselages, wings, engines lined up in stages of assembly. At its peak, 42,000 workers, many of them women, operated the plant. The Germans had been told American aircraft were inferior, built hastily by amateurs. Yet here, even through a brief passing view, they saw workmanship that contradicted every word of Nazi propaganda. These machines were not inferior. They were simply produced faster than anything Germany could imagine. The deeper the trains traveled into America, the clearer the truth became. They were moving through a nation mobilized not by coercion, but by capacity. Factories roared, rail lines pulsed, farms stretched to horizons that seemed unreal. This was not just industrial power, it was industrial confidence, the kind that could fight a war on 2 fronts without dimming a single light bulb. And as the POWs watched this world pass beyond the windows, a single thought settled over them. Germany had challenged a giant it never truly understood. The shock of American abundance did not end with the train ride. It deepened the moment the prisoners stepped through the gates of Camp Hearn in Texas, a facility built in 4 months, yet equipped with comforts that many German civilians had never known. Barracks held electric lights, flush toilets, steam heat, and hot showers. The camp hospital contained X-ray machines, surgical tools, and medicine that German doctors had not seen since 1941. When Dr. Friedrich Bauer first examined the supply room, he paused at a box of penicillin, a drug so scarce in Germany that it had become the subject of rumor. Here, it was used freely, even for minor infections, even for prisoners. In the kitchens, the revelations were just as unsettling. Walk-in refrigerators hummed beside gas, ranges large enough to feed 5,000 men. Automated mixers stirred dough while dishwashers cleaned stacks of trays in minutes. German cooks assigned to kitchen duty discovered that regulations required 10% overproduction for every meal to ensure no prisoner went hungry. The excess perfectly good bread, vegetables, meat was thrown away. Feldwebel Otto Krebs wept as he discarded loaves that would have fed his family for a week. By autumn 1943, the labor shortage across the United States brought prisoners out of the camps and into the American heartland. They rode trucks without blindfolds, passing through towns that looked impossibly prosperous. Homes with refrigerators and radios, shops full of goods, parking lots filled with cars. At cotton gins near Houston, a single machine processed more fiber in 1 hour than entire villages in Germany could handle in a month. In the fields of Nebraska, combines harvested wheat at a speed that felt unreal, one machine doing the work of 100 men. Farmers spoke casually of yields that would have seemed fantastical in Bavaria or Prussia. Factories revealed an even harsher truth. At the Campbell's soup plant in New Jersey, conveyors and automatic fillers performed the work of 50 German laborers under the watch of a single elderly woman sipping coffee. In Ohio, the blast furnaces of Republic Steel roared day and night, producing more steel in one plant than the entire Ruhr region at its wartime peak. And at the Higgins Boat Factory in New Orleans, prisoners watched women weld hulls and teenagers operate drilling machines, each shift producing landing craft by the hundreds. Everything the Nazis had declared impossible for democracies was happening in front of their eyes and happening efficiently. The psychological impact became impossible to hide. Major Paul Neuland's reports described ideological collapse syndrome. Fanatical Nazis falling silent, loyalists questioning everything they had been told. The treatment of Italian prisoners after Italy's surrender deepened the fracture. Italians who cooperated with the Allies earned wages, ate in American restaurants, and enjoyed freedoms unthinkable in Germany. German soldiers watched, stunned, as former allies were treated with a dignity the Reich had never offered them. Then came Christmas. More than 500,000 care packages arrived from churches and civic groups. Cigarettes, candy, toiletries, games sent to men who had tried to kill American sons months earlier. Choirs sang carols in German. Mothers from nearby towns baked cakes for the prisoners. The meal itself, turkey, ham, vegetables, pies, and ice cream, exceeded anything the men had eaten since before the war. Some grew ill from eating too quickly, unable to believe such abundance was ordinary. And yet the final blow would not come from generosity, but from truth. In 1945, as American forces liberated the concentration camps, the footage was shown to German prisoners. Many refused to believe it at first, but the images, the testimony, the letters from home, all aligned. What shattered that day was not merely faith in victory, but faith in the moral foundation of the Reich. Men who had endured defeat now confronted something far heavier: the knowledge that they had fought for a lie. From the American perspective, the transformation of German prisoners was never an accident. It emerged from a deliberate philosophy, one that treated strength not as the ability to crush an enemy, but as the capacity to demonstrate a better way to live. The United States understood that industrial power alone could win battles, but only a combination of abundance and dignity could win minds. And in the crowded camps scattered across 45 states, that philosophy unfolded with quiet precision. At the center of this effort stood the Special Projects Division, a small but influential arm of the Provost Marshal General's office. Its mission was simple: allow German prisoners to see America for what it truly was. No forced indoctrination, no slogans, no punishments for dissent. Instead, the program offered access to newspapers, libraries, lectures, and camp-run newspapers edited by anti-Nazi prisoners. Education became the battlefield where democracy proved its resilience. Over time, discussions shifted from bitterness and denial to economics, constitutional government, and the possibilities of a Germany rebuilt on entirely different foundations. For American strategists, this shift had profound implications. A future Germany aligned with democratic principles was essential to post-war stability and essential to preventing another nationalist revival. By granting prisoners an unfiltered view of American industry and society, the United States aimed to plant the seeds of reconstruction before the war had even ended. The approach contrasted sharply with the brutality of Nazi occupation policies. Where the Reich ruled by fear, America ruled by example. Where Nazi propaganda demanded obedience, American prosperity invited curiosity. Beyond America's borders, the effect spread quietly. British and French observers recognized the power of this model, especially as German prisoners began writing home about their experiences. The stories of abundance, opportunity, and tolerance traveled back across the Atlantic, undermining the last fragments of Nazi credibility. And after the war, when the Marshall Plan was announced, it found a receptive audience among former POWs who had already witnessed the potential of democratic capitalism firsthand. These prisoners would later help shape the institutions that defined post-war Europe: a unified Western alliance, a stable West German republic, and an economy rebuilt on efficiency rather than coercion. Their conversion, patient, voluntary, and grounded in lived reality, became one of the most subtle victories of the war. In the eyes of American planners, this was proof of something deeper: that the true strength of the United States lay not only in its production lines or military power, but in its ability to transform enemies into partners through the quiet force of its own example. In the end, the journey of the German prisoners of war became something far greater than a wartime footnote. It became a testament to the quiet power of a society confident enough to treat its enemies with dignity, wealthy enough to feed them generously, and strong enough to reveal its flaws without fear. What the prisoners witnessed across railways and farmlands, factories and camp libraries was a different kind of might, a civilian strength built not on conquest, but on creation. For men raised on the certainties of Nazi ideology, this revelation reshaped everything. They saw that prosperity did not require oppression, that unity did not require fear, that freedom, when paired with opportunity, could produce more steel, more food, more innovation, and more hope than any authoritarian dream. Some understood this truth in the glow of American cities that never dimmed. Others grasped it in the quiet of camp classrooms, where professors taught physics and history to men who had once marched under the swastika. And for many, the moment came in a simple act of kindness, an American church sending Christmas gifts to strangers who had fought on the wrong side of history. When these men returned to Germany, they carried more than memories. They carried a blueprint. Their experiences in the United States influenced the rebuilding of towns, the reform of industries, and the emergence of a democratic society determined to never again confuse tyranny with strength. The economic miracle that followed was not born from American aid alone, but from the lessons absorbed in those camps: efficiency, fairness, innovation, and the belief that the dignity of ordinary people is the foundation of national power. Today, their story echoes as a reminder that the most enduring victories are not won on battlefields but in minds and hearts. That abundance can be more persuasive than ideology, and that humanity, even in war, can reshape the future in ways no weapon ever could. So as we reflect on this extraordinary transformation from captured soldiers to architects of a new Germany, we are left with a question that reaches far beyond World War II. What kind of world becomes possible when strength is used not to dominate, but to inspire? If you have thoughts on this journey, or if it reminds you of a story from your own family's wartime past, share it below. History lives on through the voices that remember it.